It was a calm morning at the military base, the kind of quiet that almost felt like it was holding its breath. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long, soft shadows across the training grounds. Soldiers were already in formation, standing in perfect lines, their boots polished and their uniforms crisp. The air was filled with a mix of anticipation and the faint smell of early morning dew. General Ahmed, a man whose reputation was built on decades of experience and discipline, was making his rounds. He walked with a purposeful stride, his eyes scanning each soldier with a sharpness that could detect even the slightest imperfection in posture or uniform. For the soldiers, an inspection by General Ahmed was routine, yet it always carried an unspoken tension. They knew that the general was not a man to be easily impressed, and even a small mistake could bring a stern word or a pointed look. As he moved down the line, he greeted each soldier with a firm nod, a gesture that, while brief, carried weight. The soldiers returned the nods, faces set in disciplined expressions, though inside many felt a flutter of nervousness. The general was respected, even feared in some ways, but above all, he was admired for his fairness. His presence demanded attention, and everyone instinctively straightened a little taller when he approached. Everything seemed normal as he inspected the rows of soldiers. He paused briefly at one or two, checking their uniforms, their boots, their posture, and their equipment. Most passed without comment, their movements precise and rehearsed, as if they had done this 1,000 times. But then he reached Private Sanaa. She was younger than most, her uniform immaculate, but something about her made him stop. His eyes caught a faint mark on her face, a bruise that was barely visible yet unmistakable. It was on her cheek, subtle enough that it could have been mistaken for a shadow or a scratch, but the general knew better. His instincts, honed over years of experience, told him this was not an accident or a minor mishap. The general's sudden pause did not go unnoticed. Soldiers standing nearby exchanged quick, almost imperceptible glances. Whispers began to ripple quietly through the ranks, though no one dared speak aloud. The line of soldiers seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something was different. Sanaa, noticing the general's gaze, felt a lump in her throat. She tried to keep her head slightly lowered, hoping the mark wouldn't draw too much attention, but it was impossible to hide completely. She had always prided herself on her strength and composure, but now she felt the weight of vulnerability pressing down on her. For a moment, there was only silence. The usual sounds of the morning, the clinking of boots, the soft rustle of uniforms, even the distant chirping of birds, seemed to fade away. All that existed was the general, standing before her, eyes locked on the faint bruises. His face, usually calm and unreadable, showed the tiniest flicker of concern. It was subtle, but it was enough to make Sanaa's heart skip a beat. She had seen officers concerned before, but never in this way, never with the quiet intensity that suggested he truly understood without a single word spoken. The general gently stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Sanaa could hear. He didn't yell, he didn't scold. He simply asked her to step aside. There was authority in his tone, but also care. For Sanaa, that single request felt heavier than any command she had ever received, not because it was strict, but because it carried the weight of concern and attention. She obeyed, moving carefully out of the line, her heart racing with a mix of fear and relief. Behind them, the formation seemed to shift subtly. Soldiers couldn't help but watch, curiosity mingling with a sense of unease. They had all been trained to expect the unexpected, yet nothing could have prepared them for the sight of their general stopping at one soldier. His expression softened, almost human in a way they rarely saw. It was a moment that hinted at something more than military discipline. It hinted at empathy, understanding, and the recognition of the silent struggles that soldiers sometimes endured in private. As Sanaa and the general stepped aside, the rest of the soldiers felt a tension that was both strange and compelling. They had witnessed countless drills, inspections, and speeches, but this pause carried a gravity that was different. It was a moment that reminded them that behind the uniforms, behind the routines and orders, they were all human. And sometimes, human vulnerability could touch even the hardest hearts, even those accustomed to the strictest discipline. Sanaa's hands trembled slightly as she waited, unsure of what would come next. She had trained herself to endure pain, to hide her fears, and to remain strong under pressure. But now she realized that sometimes strength wasn't about hiding. It was about facing what was there and trusting someone to see it without judgment. General Ahmed's eyes met hers, and for the first time that morning, she felt truly seen. Not as a soldier, not as a number in a formation, but as a person. It was in this quiet, intense moment that the stage was set for everything that would follow. The courage to speak, the empathy to understand, and the realization that even the strongest among them could be touched by the simple act of noticing someone's pain. This morning, which had started like any other, had already changed the atmosphere of the base, and no one, least of all Sanaa, would ever forget it. After the general had stepped aside with Private Sanaa, the atmosphere in the formation shifted instantly. The soldiers, who had been standing at attention moments ago, suddenly became aware that something serious was happening. Whispers started circulating, soft and cautious, as everyone tried to figure out what had caught the general's attention. Nobody spoke too loudly. The strict rules of military discipline made sure of that. But the tension was palpable. Eyes darted toward Sanaa, who was trying to maintain composure, though her face betrayed a flicker of nervousness. She felt the weight of every gaze, knowing that the secret she had carried alone was no longer hidden. Sanaa's hands fidgeted slightly, her fingers brushing against the strap of her gear. She had always been trained to control her fear, to stay strong no matter what. But now, under the gaze of the general and the silent curiosity of her peers, she felt small and exposed. The faint bruises on her face weren't just marks. They were proof of a painful event she had endured during a mission, one she had chosen to keep to herself. Every soldier had their own struggles, but she had faced hers silently, believing it was her duty to endure without complaint. Now, she realized that hiding the truth could only last so long. The general, who was known for his strict discipline and calm demeanor, did not speak immediately. Instead, he studied her quietly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in every detail. He had seen many soldiers over the years, soldiers who were tough, soldiers who were broken, soldiers who pretended to be strong. But there was something about Sanaa's quiet strength, combined with the visible signs of her suffering, that made him pause. He wasn't angry. There was no disappointment in his tone, no reprimand waiting to be delivered. There was only concern, sharp and real, cutting through the usual routines of military life. Around them, the other soldiers shifted uneasily. They had all been trained to follow orders, to maintain formation, to focus on the mission, and to endure hardship without complaint. Yet even the most disciplined among them couldn't ignore what was happening. They watched as their general, a figure of authority and strength, treated one of their own with something rare and deeply human, empathy. Some soldiers exchanged glances, recognizing that they were witnessing a moment that would stay with them forever. Even in a world defined by rules and procedures, moments of genuine human connection could break through, and this was one of them. Sanaa felt a mix of fear and relief as the general finally spoke. He asked her to follow him to a quieter area where they could speak without the eyes of everyone in the formation on them. His voice was calm but firm, and it carried a weight that made her obey without hesitation. She knew she had to trust him, even though trust had been hard to come by in recent months. As they moved away from the line, she noticed how the formation seemed to hold its collective breath, as if the soldiers were aware that something important was unfolding. Once they were alone, the general's expression softened even further. He didn't rush her, he didn't pressure her. Instead, he waited, giving her the space to speak. For a moment, all she could do was take a shaky breath, feeling the reality of what she had been hiding pressing down on her. Then, slowly, she began to speak. She told him about the mission, about the unexpected danger, and about the moments of helplessness she had experienced. She told him about the physical pain, the fear, and the emotional strain she had endured silently, thinking that speaking out would make her seem weak. As she spoke, the general listened carefully, never interrupting, never judging. His eyes remained fixed on her, reflecting not only understanding but also a deep respect for her courage. He had seen countless soldiers in difficult situations, but few had endured in silence with such dignity. He realized that the bruises on her face were only the surface of what she had been through. The real strength, he knew, was in her resilience and her decision to continue her duty despite everything. Sanaa's voice wavered at times, and the general noticed. He didn't offer empty words or cliches. Instead, he simply nodded, showing that he was fully present, fully aware of her struggle. His presence was grounding for her, a reminder that she was not alone, that someone in a position of authority genuinely cared about her well-being. That simple act of being seen, of having her pain acknowledged, was more powerful than anything else could have been. Meanwhile, back in the formation, the soldiers continued to murmur quietly. Some guessed what had happened. Others simply watched in silent anticipation. They could feel the shift in energy, a sense that the normal routines and strict discipline had given way to something far more significant: the recognition of the human side of service. For many of them, this was a lesson in courage and empathy, demonstrating that strength was not only about enduring hardship, but also about acknowledging and supporting those who carried burdens silently. By the time the general and Sanaa returned to the formation, the soldiers had already absorbed the gravity of the moment. It was clear that what had started as a routine inspection had turned into an unforgettable lesson about courage, humanity, and the importance of noticing those who were suffering quietly. For Sanaa, it was the beginning of a journey that would not only bring relief and support, but also inspire her fellow soldiers to see each other in a new light, recognizing that bravery came in many forms, not all of them visible on the battlefield. Once Private Sanaa had been led aside by General Ahmed, she knew it was time to speak the truth she had kept hidden for so long. Standing in a quiet corner of the training ground, away from the formation and the watchful eyes of her fellow soldiers, she felt a mixture of fear, relief, and hesitation. For months, she had carried the pain silently, convinced that showing weakness could make her seem unfit for service. But now, faced with the general's calm and attentive presence, she realized that someone in authority truly cared enough to listen, and that gave her a small but powerful courage. Sanaa took a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands. The words she had rehearsed in her mind countless times suddenly felt inadequate. How could she describe not only the physical pain but also the emotional turmoil she had endured? She knew that the general would understand the importance of honesty, yet she still feared judgment. Despite this, she began to speak, slowly at first, her voice low and wavering, then gaining strength as she continued. She recounted the mission during which the injuries had occurred. It had been a routine operation, but things had gone terribly wrong. A small team had been ambushed, and in the chaos, she had been physically struck. The incident was brief but violent, leaving marks that were visible now on her face. Sanaa explained that she had not reported the assault immediately because she wanted to focus on the mission and protect her fellow soldiers. She had believed that sharing her pain would burden the team or slow them down, and she had prided herself on staying strong no matter the circumstances. As she spoke, the general listened without interruption. He didn't offer empty reassurances or quick judgments. Instead, he gave her his full attention, his eyes reflecting concern, understanding, and a rare kind of respect. He understood that what she had endured went beyond a simple injury. It was a test of courage, resilience, and the human will to continue despite suffering. He knew that soldiers often bore their hardships silently, but few admitted their struggles so openly. In that moment, he realized the depth of her bravery. Sanaa also shared the emotional toll the incident had taken. She described the nights spent replaying the events in her mind, the quiet moments when the pain and fear seemed overwhelming, and the effort it took each day to maintain composure in front of others. She had hidden her fear from her comrades, not wanting them to worry, but it had left her feeling isolated. Speaking these truths to the general was both terrifying and relieving. Terrifying because vulnerability was never easy, but relieving because for the first time, someone in authority truly understood her struggle. The general remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words. His experience had taught him that listening was often more powerful than speaking. By letting her tell her story in her own words, he allowed her to reclaim some of the control that the incident had taken away. He knew that acknowledging pain didn't make a soldier weak. it made them human. And in recognizing her humanity, he reinforced the idea that strength wasn't just about enduring hardship silently. It was also about the courage to speak when necessary. Sanaa noticed the subtle gestures of empathy, the way the general's posture softened, how his eyes never wavered from her face, and the gentle tilt of his head that showed he was fully present. These small actions, though quiet, were profound. They communicated trust and validation, and for Sanaa, they were as important as any words of comfort. She felt that, for the first time in months, she wasn't alone. Her courage had been acknowledged, and her voice had been heard. Meanwhile, the rest of the soldiers in formation waited, unaware of the details but sensing that something significant was unfolding. Military life was often rigid, with clear rules and strict hierarchies, but moments like these broke through the routine. The soldiers could feel the change in energy even from a distance, understanding that their general's attention was focused on something deeply human. They had been trained to value discipline and strength, but they were beginning to see that compassion and understanding were equally important qualities in leadership. As Sanaa continued to speak, she realized that sharing her story was not just about receiving help. It was about reclaiming her own strength. The act of confession allowed her to confront the fear she had carried alone and to transform it into something constructive. She understood that acknowledging pain did not diminish her value as a soldier. Rather, it highlighted her resilience, her determination, and her unwavering commitment to duty despite hardship. By the time she finished, there was a quiet pause, filled with unspoken understanding. The general remained composed, but his eyes reflected the weight of what she had shared. He recognized that her story was a testament to the quiet courage that many soldiers displayed but few admitted. Her honesty had given him insight into the hidden battles that soldiers fought every day, battles that were not always visible on the surface. In that moment, the bond between general and soldier deepened. It was built not on authority alone, but on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. Sanaa had shown immense bravery by speaking her truth, and the general had demonstrated wisdom by listening. Together, they created a space where pain could be acknowledged without judgment, and where strength could be measured not only by endurance but by courage in vulnerability. The conversation ended with a sense of quiet resolution. Sanaa felt lighter, as if the burden she had carried alone for so long had been partially lifted simply by speaking it aloud. The general had not only heard her story, he had honored it. And for the first time in a long while, Sanaa felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her experience, though painful, had been seen, acknowledged, and respected by someone she admired deeply. After listening to Private Sanaa's confession, General Ahmed stood in silence for a few moments, letting her words settle in his mind. He had faced countless challenges in his long military career, dangerous missions, tense negotiations, and the loss of brave soldiers, but nothing had prepared him for the raw honesty and courage he had just witnessed. The sight of Sanaa, a young soldier barely out of her training, carrying both visible and invisible scars yet still standing with determination, struck him in a way he had not expected. For the first time in a long while, the general felt the overwhelming weight of human vulnerability and the emotional cost of service. He had always believed in discipline, order, and resilience. He had drilled soldiers to remain calm under fire, to follow orders without hesitation, and to endure pain without complaint. But as he looked at Sanaa, he realized that there was a depth of bravery that he had never fully acknowledged. A bravery not measured by medals or combat achievements, but by the quiet endurance of hardship, often unseen by others. The bruises on her face were not just injuries. They were symbols of her courage, proof of the obstacles she had faced alone, and reminders that soldiers often carried battles beyond the battlefield. The general's usual stoic expression, the one that rarely betrayed emotion, softened as he processed the story. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, now reflected concern, empathy, and a rare vulnerability. He felt a knot tighten in his chest, a mixture of sorrow for what Sanaa had endured, pride for her strength, and a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that his duty extended beyond giving orders and leading missions. It also meant protecting the physical and emotional well-being of the soldiers under his command. For a brief moment, the silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken understanding. Sanaa, sensing the general's emotional response, felt a strange mix of fear and reassurance. She had always imagined authority figures as strict, unyielding, and almost untouchable, but here was someone in power who was fully human, someone who could feel deeply and react with genuine emotion. His quiet presence was a powerful contrast to the rigid hierarchy she was accustomed to, and it gave her a sense of safety she had not realized she needed. As the general finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried an unmistakable weight. He did not immediately offer solutions or instructions. Instead, he acknowledged her courage. He expressed admiration for her resilience and praised her honesty, emphasizing that it was not a weakness to speak about suffering, but a profound act of bravery. In his words, there was no judgment, no reprimand, only understanding and respect. The general understood that a soldier's strength was not only in physical endurance, but also in the courage to reveal vulnerability and seek support when necessary. Sanaa's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of relief. For months, she had carried the burden alone, believing that sharing it would make her seem weak or incapable. Now, she realized that her strength had been recognized, not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. The acknowledgement from someone she respected so deeply validated her experience and gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She began to feel that her pain had meaning and that her story could inspire others, showing them that even in silence, bravery could shine through. The general's reaction was a rare glimpse into the humanity behind his authority. Soldiers had always known him as disciplined, unyielding, and strict, but rarely had they seen him express such emotion. His subtle shaking of the head, the slight quiver in his voice, and the moisture forming in the corners of his eyes revealed that even the strongest leaders could be deeply affected by the struggles of those they led. For him, this was a reminder that leadership was not only about strategy and command. It was also about empathy, understanding, and the capacity to feel the weight of responsibility for the lives entrusted to him. As they stood together, the general reflected on the countless other soldiers who might be silently suffering, enduring challenges without anyone noticing. Sanaa's bravery had opened his eyes to the hidden battles within the ranks, and he felt a renewed determination to create an environment where soldiers could feel safe enough to share their struggles. He realized that acknowledging pain, offering support, and listening with genuine attention were just as important as training and discipline. Sanaa, for her part, felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. Seeing the general, a figure she had always seen as nearly invincible, show such genuine emotion reminded her that leadership and humanity were intertwined. She understood that courage was not only in facing external dangers, but also in facing internal struggles with honesty and openness. For the first time, she felt that she was not alone in her journey, and that her experiences could contribute to a culture of support and empathy within the military. The moment left a lasting impression on both of them. The general carried a deep respect for Sanaa's courage, and she, in turn, gained a mentor who saw her as more than a soldier, someone who recognized her humanity and resilience. It was a moment that transcended the usual hierarchy, a shared understanding that strength and vulnerability could coexist, and that even in the harshest environments, compassion could make a profound difference. As they prepared to return to the formation, the general took a final, steadying breath. He knew that he had witnessed something extraordinary, a rare demonstration of bravery that went beyond duty and protocol. Sanaa, feeling a sense of calm and newfound strength, straightened her posture and wiped her eyes. Together, they were ready to face the rest of the day, carrying the quiet but powerful reminder that true courage often lies in acknowledging pain, seeking understanding, and showing empathy in a world that can sometimes forget the human side of service. After the quiet, emotional moment with Private Sanaa, General Ahmed returned to the formation, his mind heavy with thoughts but his resolve clear. The soldiers, sensing that something significant had happened, waited quietly, their disciplined posture unchanged but their curiosity growing. Normally, after inspections, the general would move on, giving orders or providing brief feedback. But today was different. Something inside him urged him to address the entire unit, not with instructions about drills or strategy, but with words that came from the heart. He motioned for the soldiers to gather closer, their rigid lines gradually loosening as they sensed a change in the atmosphere. There was a hush over the group, a tension mixed with anticipation. They had all seen General Ahmed in action countless times, commanding, instructing, correcting, but rarely had they witnessed a side of him that was so human, so empathetic. Now, as he prepared to speak, even the most seasoned soldiers straightened instinctively, understanding that this would not be an ordinary address. The general began carefully, his voice steady but full of emotion. He didn't start with military terms or talk of orders and protocols. Instead, he spoke about courage, real courage, the kind that isn't always recognized in medals or promotions, but in the quiet, unseen moments where a person continues despite fear, pain, or hardship. He described the bravery it took for a soldier to endure in silence, to protect comrades, and to keep moving forward even when the odds seemed impossible. His words resonated deeply, for he was speaking not only as a leader, but as someone who had witnessed the hidden struggles of countless soldiers over the years. As he spoke, the general shared, in general terms, the story of a young soldier who had endured pain in silence, remaining committed to her duty despite being hurt. He didn't reveal names at first, allowing the soldiers to focus on the lesson rather than the individual. His description was vivid enough to convey the intensity of her experience, the fear, the struggle, and the courage, but it was also careful, showing respect for the privacy and dignity of the soldier involved. The soldiers listened intently, some shifting slightly as they absorbed the weight of the story. It was a story they could relate to. Many of them had faced challenges that went unseen, battles that were fought in quiet moments away from the eyes of others. As he continued, the general emphasized the importance of empathy and support within the unit. He spoke about how every soldier carried their own burdens, physical injuries, emotional struggles, and personal fears, but often, these struggles went unnoticed. He urged his team to pay attention to one another, to notice the subtle signs of distress, and to offer help without hesitation. His words were not just advice. They were a call to action, a reminder that leadership and camaraderie went hand in hand. Soldiers were strongest when they could rely on one another, and recognizing each other's humanity was key to building that strength. During his address, the general's voice occasionally cracked with emotion. It was a rare sight. Soldiers had been trained to maintain composure at all times, and their leaders usually displayed the same stoicism. Yet here was someone they deeply respected, showing them that even the strongest could be affected by compassion and concern. This vulnerability made his words even more powerful. It was a demonstration that courage and emotion were not mutually exclusive. In fact, they often reinforced one another. Soldiers could be strong and disciplined, yet still capable of deep empathy and understanding. The soldiers began to feel the weight of what he was saying. Some glanced at one another, their eyes reflecting a mixture of pride, understanding, and perhaps even a little guilt for the times they had overlooked their comrades' struggles. Others felt a swell of emotion, realizing that their own hardships might someday be understood in the same way. The general's speech was a reminder that they were not just a collection of disciplined bodies performing orders. They were humans, with vulnerabilities, emotions, and strengths that went far beyond what could be measured in drills or missions. He continued by stressing the responsibility of leadership. Leaders were not just there to give orders. They were there to see, understand, and support their soldiers. The smallest act of noticing a struggle, offering help, or simply listening could change lives. It was a lesson in empathy as much as it was in duty. The general wanted every soldier to leave that formation with a renewed understanding of what it meant to care for one another. Not just as teammates, but as human beings. As his words sank in, several soldiers quietly wiped away tears. Some of the toughest, most disciplined members of the unit found themselves moved by the general's sincerity and the message he was conveying. It was not just about following orders anymore. It was about connection, compassion, and recognizing the courage that existed in silence. The impact of his address was immediate, filling the formation with a sense of unity and shared understanding that went deeper than any command could achieve. Finally, he concluded with a message of hope and pride. He praised the bravery of those who continued despite hardship and reminded everyone that their strength was amplified by their support for one another. He reminded them that courage came in many forms, not all of them visible, and that the greatest leaders were those who could see and honor the unseen struggles of their team. When the general finished speaking, a quiet reverence filled the formation. Soldiers stood a little taller, feeling seen, understood, and inspired. The lesson of empathy and true courage had been made clear, leaving an impression that would stay with them long after the morning was over. For Private Sanaa, it was a confirmation that her struggle mattered, and for the general, it was a moment that reinforced the true essence of leadership. The combination of strength, compassion, and the ability to inspire others through understanding. As General Ahmed's words settled over the formation, a powerful silence took hold. For the first time that morning, the soldiers were not thinking about drills, missions, or protocol. They were thinking about each other, about the hidden struggles that might exist within their own ranks. The general had spoken with a sincerity that was almost palpable, and it touched every soldier present. His words had reminded them that courage was not just about following orders or performing perfectly in training. It was also about enduring pain, showing empathy, and supporting one another in ways that often went unnoticed. For many of the soldiers, the message hit harder than expected. Years of military training had taught them to suppress emotion, to hide fear, and to maintain a strong exterior at all times. They had prided themselves on being unshakable, on showing no weakness. Yet now, faced with the story of a young soldier who had endured injury and hardship silently, and with a general who openly acknowledged and respected her bravery, some soldiers began to feel emotions they had long kept bottled up. They realized that it was okay to feel, to empathize, and even to cry in response to human courage and suffering. A few soldiers quietly wiped tears from their eyes, trying to hide them, but the impact was clear. The air felt heavier, yet fuller, as if it carried a new sense of understanding. They could feel the struggles of their comrade through the general's words, and it was impossible to ignore. The story of Private Sanaa, combined with the general's emotional response, had become more than an anecdote. It had become a mirror for each soldier, reflecting the times they had suffered in silence and the moments when they had wished someone would notice. Even the toughest soldiers, those who had been praised for their discipline and resilience, felt a lump in their throats. They thought of the injuries they had hidden, the fears they had concealed, and the nights when they had cried alone, unsure of how to ask for help. For the first time, they realized that vulnerability did not make them weak. It made them human. The general had shown them that true leadership meant noticing the unseen battles and acknowledging the courage that existed even in silence. It was a lesson that went beyond military discipline. It was a lesson in life. Sanaa, standing nearby, observed her fellow soldiers' reactions with a mixture of relief and humility. She had never expected her personal struggle to resonate with so many people, yet it had. She realized that by sharing her story, she had not only found a voice for herself, but had also opened the door for others to confront their own hidden pain. It was a reminder that bravery could inspire, that honesty could connect people, and that empathy could transform an entire group of individuals. The general noticed the soldiers' emotional responses but did not interrupt them. He understood that this was a moment for reflection, not for immediate action. Sometimes, silence and observation were more powerful than any words. He allowed them to process what they had heard, to feel the weight of courage, pain, and compassion. Each soldier experienced the story differently. Some thought of their comrades, some of themselves, and some simply absorbed the message of shared humanity. Gradually, the soldiers began to shift from silent reflection to subtle acknowledgement. Some looked at their fellow soldiers with renewed understanding, nodding or placing a reassuring hand on a shoulder. It was a quiet, unspoken communication, a promise that they would be more aware, more supportive, and more compassionate. The general's address had planted a seed of empathy, and the soldiers were beginning to nurture it in their own way. As the formation continued to stand, there was a sense of unity that had not been there before. The soldiers were no longer just individuals performing tasks. They were a team bound by shared experiences and mutual respect. They understood that each member of the unit carried hidden burdens, and that acknowledging these struggles was a vital part of being a cohesive, effective team. The general had reminded them that true strength was collective, built on trust, understanding, and the willingness to support one another. Sanaa felt a warm sense of belonging. The same soldiers who had never known the details of her struggle now seemed to understand her resilience. She realized that sharing her pain had created a ripple effect, inspiring others to recognize their own struggles and to feel a deeper connection with their comrades. It was a powerful moment of transformation, both for herself and for the unit as a whole. The general concluded the gathering with a quiet affirmation that bravery existed in many forms, not just in battle, but also in the courage to endure, to speak, and to feel. He emphasized that soldiers were strongest not when they were alone, but when they leaned on one another for support and guidance. The formation, once filled with rigid discipline, now seemed infused with empathy, compassion, and a renewed sense of purpose. By the time the gathering ended, the soldiers were visibly changed. Some still had tears in their eyes, but they were tears of understanding, connection, and recognition. They had witnessed a profound moment of leadership, one that combined strength, discipline, and humanity. The impact would stay with them, guiding their interactions with each other in the days, weeks, and years to come. Sanaa returned to her position with a lighter heart, knowing that her story had made a difference. The soldiers, inspired by the general's words and their own emotional responses, began to move with a renewed sense of solidarity. The lesson was clear. Empathy and courage were inseparable, and true strength was measured not only in what one could endure, but in how one could inspire and uplift others through understanding. The morning, which had started like any other, had transformed into an unforgettable moment of collective growth. The soldiers learned that acknowledging vulnerability was not weakness, that compassion was a form of courage, and that even the strongest among them could be moved by the bravery of those who quietly endured. It was a lesson that would shape their service, their relationships, and their understanding of what it truly meant to be brave. After the emotional gathering with the soldiers, General Ahmed knew that his words alone were not enough. He had reminded them of courage, empathy, and the importance of noticing each other's struggles, but he also understood that action was necessary. He could not allow the story of Private Sanaa, or any similar situation, to remain just a lesson in words. Leadership, he believed, required follow-through. Real care meant making tangible changes to ensure that soldiers were safe, supported, and respected. Immediately after the assembly, the general called his trusted officers for a private discussion. His first priority was Sanaa's well-being. He insisted that she receive full medical attention to properly treat her injuries, which were more than just superficial bruises. A military medic would examine her, provide treatment for her physical wounds, and monitor her recovery to prevent any lasting damage. The general also arranged for psychological support, knowing that trauma often left scars that were not visible on the outside. Counseling and therapy sessions would help Sanaa process her experience, regain confidence, and strengthen her mental resilience. Sanaa, though initially hesitant, agreed to the assistance. She had been accustomed to hiding her pain, relying solely on her own strength to endure challenges. But now, seeing the general's determination and the respect he showed toward her, she realized that accepting help was not a sign of weakness. It was a step toward true recovery and strength. The knowledge that someone in authority genuinely cared about her well-being gave her a sense of security she had not felt before. The general also understood that this situation highlighted a larger issue within the unit: the need for stronger protocols to protect soldiers in the field. He immediately began reviewing current procedures and safety measures, identifying areas where additional safeguards were necessary. Whether it was improving communication during missions, providing better protective equipment, or establishing clear reporting channels for incidents, he was determined to create an environment where soldiers could perform their duties without fear of harm going unnoticed or unaddressed. He emphasized to his officers that protecting soldiers went beyond ensuring their physical safety. It also meant fostering a culture of trust and accountability. Soldiers had to feel confident that their concerns would be taken seriously, that their voices mattered, and that they could rely on leadership for support. The general's vision was clear: A strong unit was not built solely on discipline and training, but on mutual respect, empathy, and the ability to recognize the hidden struggles of each member. Sanaa, meanwhile, began to experience the benefits of these changes firsthand. She received attentive medical care, and the counseling sessions provided her with strategies to process her emotions and regain her inner strength. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that her health and well-being were priorities, and that she was not alone in dealing with the aftermath of the incident. The general's actions had transformed what could have been a painful, isolating experience into an opportunity for support, growth, and renewed confidence. The ripple effect of the general's actions was felt throughout the unit. Soldiers observed that leadership was not just about giving orders but about taking responsibility for the welfare of the team. They saw that even the highest-ranking officer could show empathy, take decisive action, and implement meaningful change. This realization strengthened their respect for the general and deepened their trust in the chain of command. It also inspired them to be more attentive to each other's needs, creating a culture of vigilance and compassion that extended beyond formal protocols. In addition to addressing the immediate situation, the general held discussions with his officers about long-term strategies for soldier support. He encouraged training programs that emphasized psychological resilience, peer support systems, and early detection of stress or trauma. He wanted every soldier to know that reporting difficulties or injuries, whether physical or emotional, was not only acceptable but expected. This approach fostered a culture where vulnerability was met with care and action, rather than judgment or neglect. The general also made a point to recognize Sanaa publicly within the unit, not to shame or single her out, but to honor her bravery and resilience. By doing so, he sent a clear message. Courage could take many forms, including the willingness to endure hardship, continue performing duties despite challenges, and ultimately speak up when necessary. This acknowledgement reinforced the idea that leadership was not only about commanding respect but about cultivating it through understanding, action, and integrity. Sanaa's journey of recovery became an example for her fellow soldiers. They began to see that strength was not only about physical endurance or tactical skill, it was also about acknowledging one's limits, seeking help, and supporting others in doing the same. The general's response had created a safe environment where soldiers could be both strong and human, where their well-being was valued as much as their effectiveness in missions. By the end of the day, the general's decisive actions had begun to reshape the culture of the unit. Soldiers were inspired not only by his words but by the tangible measures he had taken to protect and support them. They realized that leadership combined empathy with responsibility and that true strength came from the ability to care for others as much as oneself. For Sanaa, this was transformative. She no longer felt isolated. She felt seen, respected, and supported. The general's actions had turned a moment of vulnerability into a catalyst for growth, resilience, and unity within the unit. In every decision he made, from arranging medical care to reviewing protocols and promoting a culture of empathy, the general demonstrated that leadership was not merely about command. It was about responsibility, compassion, and the courage to act when it mattered most. His handling of the situation ensured that no soldier would ever feel invisible, reminding everyone that the true measure of bravery lies not only in surviving hardship, but in creating a world where others are empowered to do the same. After all the events of that day, the inspection, the revelation of her injuries, the general's emotional response, and the changes implemented to support her, Private Sanaa began to feel a transformation within herself. The burden she had carried in silence for so long seemed lighter now. She realized that courage was not just about enduring hardships alone. It was also about allowing others to see your struggle and accepting support when it was offered. This was a lesson she would carry with her forever, one that extended beyond the military into life itself. Sanaa's recovery progressed steadily. The medical care she received ensured that her physical injuries healed, but more importantly, the psychological support helped her process the trauma she had endured. She no longer felt that she had to shoulder her pain alone. Speaking her truth to General Ahmed had opened a door through which she realized that vulnerability could coexist with strength, and that bravery was not measured solely by stoicism. She started to regain confidence, not only in her abilities as a soldier but in her capacity to face challenges and ask for help when necessary. Her story, though deeply personal, had a profound effect on the unit as a whole. Soldiers who had witnessed the general's reaction and listened to his heartfelt address began to reflect on their own experiences. Many had hidden their own injuries or struggles, believing that to speak of them would be a sign of weakness. Now, seeing Sanaa's courage and the general's empathy, they understood that strength was not in silence alone. It was also in recognition, support, and honesty. The culture of the unit began to shift subtly. Soldiers became more observant, more caring toward one another, and more willing to speak up when something was wrong. The general's actions had left an indelible mark on everyone. By combining compassion with decisive action, he had taught a lesson far more powerful than any military drill or speech. He demonstrated that leadership was about more than strategy or discipline. It was about humanity, integrity, and the courage to do what is right, even when it is difficult. Soldiers realized that true respect and loyalty were built on mutual care and understanding, not fear or authority alone. Sanaa herself began to inspire others. Her quiet resilience, combined with the courage to speak out, became an example of bravery in action. Younger recruits who looked up to her learned that it was okay to face challenges openly and to trust the leadership when in need. Her story circulated within the unit, not as gossip or spectacle, but as a powerful lesson in the real meaning of courage. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of honesty and vulnerability could create waves of change, encouraging empathy and solidarity among the team. The bond between General Ahmed and Sanaa also grew stronger. He continued to mentor her, offering guidance, advice, and reassurance. But their relationship went beyond mentorship. It was one of mutual respect, built on shared experiences of understanding pain, demonstrating courage, and acting with integrity. The general saw in Sanaa a reflection of the bravery that many soldiers possessed but rarely revealed. For her, his continued support reinforced the lesson that leadership was as much about protecting and uplifting your soldiers as it was about commanding them. Beyond the unit, the story of Sanaa and the general became a model for others. Officers and soldiers in nearby units took note of how the situation was handled, with sensitivity, action, and empathy. It highlighted the importance of addressing the emotional and psychological needs of soldiers alongside their physical duties. This approach gradually influenced policies and practices, promoting a culture where mental health, vulnerability, and courage were recognized as integral to a soldier's effectiveness and overall well-being. Sanaa also discovered a personal sense of empowerment. She realized that her experience, though painful, had shaped her into a stronger, wiser soldier. She learned that facing adversity was not just about surviving. It was about transforming challenges into lessons for herself and for others. Every time she looked in the mirror, the faint marks of her injuries reminded her not of suffering alone, but of resilience, support, and the bonds that had been strengthened through this ordeal. The general, reflecting on the journey, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. As a leader, he had witnessed countless acts of bravery in battle, but few had been as profound as seeing a soldier endure hardship silently and then embrace the courage to speak. He understood that leadership was about more than strategy and commands. It was about creating an environment where soldiers could be seen, supported, and inspired to reach their full potential. The emotional impact of the day reinforced his belief that empathy and decisive action were inseparable elements of true leadership. In the months that followed, the unit thrived in ways that could not be measured by drills or performance metrics alone. Soldiers were more connected, attentive, and compassionate toward each other. They understood that their strength lay not only in individual endurance but also in collective care. The lessons learned from Sanaa's experience and the general's response became embedded in the culture of the unit, leaving a legacy of courage, empathy, and mutual respect. For Private Sanaa, the journey was transformative. She emerged stronger, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. Her story, her voice, and her courage had created ripples that extended far beyond her own experience. The general's tears, his words, and his actions had validated her struggle, and in doing so, had set a powerful example for everyone around her. She learned that being brave did not mean hiding pain. It meant facing it, speaking it, and inspiring others through it. The day that had begun like any other at the base ended as a moment of profound change. The soldiers, inspired by the bravery of one of their own and the humanity of their leader, had learned lessons they would carry for life. That courage and vulnerability are not opposites, that empathy strengthens a team, and that true leadership transforms lives. Private Sanaa's story became a symbol of resilience, hope, and the extraordinary power of being seen, heard, and respected, leaving an imprint on the hearts of everyone who witnessed it.